Hi everybody and welcome to the second season of my Nostalgia Trip games. If you noticed, I'm in a different room than I usually am, and that's because I finally found out how to record gameplay footage of DOSbox. And yeah, I will be using DOSbox because I can't get stuff recorded from my real DOS-based PC for some reason. So yeah, finally we get to the DOS games, and here's the first 5. Enjoy. I'm not entirely sure about the chronological order of my history with DOS games, so I'll just go by a hunch. One of the first DOS-based PCs that I played on was one with a CGA graphics card, I think. Quite possibly an old IBM with a 286 Intel processor or older. One of my old teachers actually had it. If I recall correctly, it might have had a hard drive, or maybe the 2 games I played on it were just on one diskette. I can't really say for sure. But what I can say for sure is that the first game I ever played on that particular machine was Tetris, which is a game I can easily put on many more lists. But this particular variant of Tetris was a slightly evolved one that featured changing background graphics, but very similar gameplay to the C64 version that I was already acquainted with. Now, there's obviously not much that I can say about Tetris that's neither obvious nor boring, but I can say that with these 2 versions of Tetris being my first experiences of the game, I learned to play the game as such, and they remain my favorite versions of the original Tetris. But in the case of this particular Tetris, it's the CGA mode that I feel the most nostalgic about. The other game I played a lot on the aforementioned CGA-equipped DOS PC was Night Mission Pinball. For a long time, I had no idea it had also been released on the C64 because none of my friends in my area had it, nor was there an internet to learn more about it. Anyway, the neat trick in Night Mission Pinball was its pseudo-arcade style approach to it, as if it was trying to simulate an arcade pinball machine as closely as possible, as in feeding the game a virtual coin before starting it, and causing tilts and such. Little did I know back then that this was exactly what the game was on about, and much more. As it happens, once you have launched the game and selected your preferred monitor, you can access a menu in which you can adjust a whole lot of things, such as tilt sensitivity, spinner friction, randomizer, bumper impulse, flipper powers, all sorts of velocities and what have you. This would allow the game to perform pretty much exactly as you wanted it to, taking the limitations of 1982 game developing in general into account. Night Mission was the first step in taking computer pinball games into a direction of proper simulation, and I think it should be considered more important than it currently is. Sure, it's only one table, but the options make it a very interesting game. To me, Night Mission Pinball is a top-notch nostalgia trip game for the DOS-based PCs, and for all the right reasons. Another PC that I played many times on before I got my own first PC was at my cousin's home about 150 kilometers away. It was a much more evolved PC which featured a VGA graphics card, I think. It might have even had a sound card, I can't remember exactly, because most of the games I played on it didn't feature better than PC beeper sounds. The first game that I remember playing on it was a Pac-Man variant called CD Man, which was a very odd-looking game with very colorful, high-resolution graphics, of course relative to its time, and very different map designs featuring gates that needed to be opened and bridges and whatnot. I can't remember if I ever got very far in it because it felt much more difficult than the original Pac-Man games, but it did feel much more intriguing due to the graphics. Later on I found out that there were various versions of it made between 1989 and 1992, but I think the version I played back then was the original pre-release with the Pac-Man looking main character instead of the white fluffy guy called Snoofer. But version number 2 is really the best with the most levels, and it also had a dual playing mode in which you can play simultaneously with your friend. It's also the version you can find most easily lying around in the retro gaming corners of the internet. On that same PC that my cousin had, the most played game was, at least the one that I play the most on, was the Accolade Classic space shooter and strategy game Star Control. Being as young and action fanatic as I was, I never really got into the heavier strategic side of the game, but I fought many melee battles against my cousins. What Star Control is basically about is a battle between good and evil, the alliance of free stars versus the Urquan hierarchy. The action happens in a wraparound type space environment that plays similarly to asteroids, but gets zoomed in and out a couple of times. Each team has 7 alien races to duel against, each having their own specific sort of spacecraft with specific weaponry. Unfortunately, it doesn't really take too long to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of each alien race and their ships. Most of the time, you're gonna realize you're being overpowered by 1 or 2 specific spacecraft from the other team while having done no real damage to them. The advantages are usually unfair, which is where your strategizing skills come into play. The original Star Control was released on many different platforms, even on the 8-bit computers, but somehow it seems most at home on the DOS PCs. Or maybe it's just nostalgia, I don't know. Of course, there's a reason why Star Control 2 was originally only released on the DOS-based PCs, although I cannot fathom why it was officially only ported to the 3DO in 1994, but I guess I'll talk more about that particular game in a later episode. For each DOS episode, and probably for Windows episode as well, I'll try to fit in 1 or 2 games from more modern independent game developers, most likely Finnish ones, just for the sake of exposure. For the first DOS episode, I have chosen a fairly simplistic yet infernally addicting sports game that me and many of my friends used to grind like maniacs back in the day. It's called Ski Jump International 2. Ski Jump 2 was the first sequel to a game originally titled Lartsan Ski Jump, which had the same basic idea but was even cruder than the sequel. The idea is simply to jump various ski jumping hills with heavy focus on timing, wind factor, and your flight angle. While it looks like a funny and simple game, it's one of the first really evolved ski jumping simulators ever made. It even features 2 possible landing styles, a regular landing and the famous telemark landing, which is the more hazardous one to perform. Like the first game in the series, the original 2.0 version only had a simple stick figure to portray as the ski jumper, but version 2.1 had the option to make the stick figure appear more human. To be honest, it only made things worse since a stick figure is easier to decipher. But happily, it's only an option. Version 2.1 also has the advantage of having more hills than 2.0, as well as a team cup mode in which you could compete in a team with your friend against computer opponents. I've wasted so many hours on this game I can't even count. But more importantly, most of those hours were spent playing against a friend, sharing the same keyboard of course, which is something you can't really do much these days because of the internet and other nonsense.